Hello everyone. I would like to share with you 3 pictures of places you might recognize and ask, what do these places have in common? Try and guess. The Highland Park in New York, the Tate Modern Museum in London, and the Tropical Islands Water Park near Berlin. All these places share a common history. They all used to be former industrial assets adapted into new functions. This act is called adaptive reuse, and it is a strategy in building conservation that aims to conserve a building while adapting it from one use to another. Let's see briefly the history of adaptive reuse. Adaptive reuse is definitely not a new phenomenon. We can see evidence for it already from a long time ago, such as the old Greek temple of the Parthenon that under the Ottoman rule went to be a mosque, or the Louvre Museum that initially was built as a medieval castle, afterwards was made into a Renaissance palace, and only during the 18th century got to be the museum we all know today. But, well, all of these examples were adapted due to all kinds of historical or political circumstances. Today we're going to speak about another aspect of adaptive reuse, which is the value of heritage conservation. When did the importance and the recognition of the importance of heritage conservation first began? World War II caused a great destructions on cities around the world. Many old monuments were severely damaged, while millions of people lost their homes. After the war, an immediate act should be taken in order to restore the devastated cities. Thus, after the war, there were a building boom. Due to the building boom and the new emerging modern architectural styles on the one hand, and the many damaged historical monuments on the other hand, the field of architecture, there was a reaction that was evoking. Thus, in 1964, the Venice Charter was drafted. The Venice Charter, which was a seminal document, tried to draw the desirable guidelines for the restoration and conservation of buildings and sites. And that was actually the first time when adaptive reuse was formally recognized as a desirable way to conserve buildings. Since the 70s, we can see many projects of adaptive reuse, and it got to be quite a common strategy for building conservation. At the beginning, it was quite clear what kind of buildings should be conserved. And the main focus was on building from old times. However, since the second half of the 20th century, following the post-industrial era of cities and the accumulation of many unused industrial assets, there was a great recognition of the importance of the industrial heritage as well. Thus, 10 years after the drafting of the Venice Charter, in 1978, the TICI organization was established, and that in order to safeguard the industrial heritage around the world. And that is the common history of these places I showed you before. Now let me share with you my own interest in the field of adaptive reuse. In 2014, I went into a student exchange in Turin, Italy, where I was studying in an old building of the Fiat car factory. This building went out of use during the 80s, and 20 years afterward was adapted into a multifunctional center, including the Faculty of Architecture where I studied. When I was exposed first time to this building, I recognized the great potential of the adaptive reuse. I saw the architectural value of it. By adapting the building instead of destroying it, the building could save its unique architectural features. I saw also the social value of it. The post-industrial city of Turin, the Fiat factory wasn't only a building, it was much more like a symbol of an era in people's lives. And finally, I saw the economic potential value for urban renewal in a deteriorated post-industrial era of the city, as well as being a sustainable alternative for saving resources, as we heard before from Omri, how it is important, especially these days when we're facing the climatic crisis. Then, when I came back home to Israel, I asked myself, how can it be implemented here? I was really captivated by this adaptive reuse strategy. And that sent me to study about the industrial heritage of Israel. The first question I asked was, where can I find industrial heritage in Israel? And then I figured out there were two main stages. The first building, industrial buildings that were built here in Israel were during the British Mandate and were concentrated mainly in the port cities of Haifa and Tel Aviv. That's in order to enjoy the vicinity to the port and to the rail as means of transportation. However, after the establishment of Israel, there was a geographical shift, and most of the industrial factories were built at the periphery, the development towns. And that is not a coincidence. Following the dispersal policy, many new settlements were built around the country, and thousands of new immigrants were brought to live there. In order to supply them with working places, dozens of new factories were built. I chose to focus my study on the industrial heritage of the development towns that were built in these years at the first decades of Israel, and that's for a couple of reasons. First, I found out this field haven't been researched enough yet, and this type of industrial heritage was underestimated. Second, I saw there is a high concentration of abandoned factories in the development towns, and therefore there is the potential for adaptive reuse. And third, I saw a great opportunity for making a change in this development town that suffers from a continuous neglect and deterioration. And that led me to my research question, which is, in what way could the conservation of the industrial heritage of Israel development town contribute to their physical, social, and economic promotion? To show you a bit of the values embodied in this type of factories, I would like to briefly present the case study of Kitan Dimona that showcase the story of many other more factories. The Kitan Dimona was a textile factory built in 1962 in Dimona. It was designed by a foreign company and was working for 50 years until its closure in 2012. Now let us look on the three values I've been talking about before: the architectural, the social, and the economic. Let's begin with the architectural level. One of its main features is the monumental dimension and the extraordinarily large span of the factory. As you can feel from the internal space, there is a very unique atmosphere. In addition, you can look on the roof, which is so huge even in terms of today that its size is as big as 4 soccer fields. Another unique value is the design of the facade and the use of a natural light and ventilation. And finally, these buildings have the typical brutalist style features, such as the brise soleil sun shadings that are very typical and represent its time. Now let us move to the social value. As part of my methodology, I was taking a couple of interviews with residents of Dimona, and that's in order to understand the impact the factory has on their life. In the following slide, you can see some of the quotes of Victor, a past worker in Kitan, that will show you this effect. So Victor tells us how much this factory was a main worker supplier for all of the residents of Dimona. And that means it was affecting the lives of most of the residents, for good and for bad, both women, as you see, and men. Victor also tells us that this was a source of local pride. As he says, it was something special. Kitan was a symbol. And finally, he also speaks about the worldwide success and international recognition in its good days, when part of its product were exported to the US. Finally, since the 70s, this factory, like others, was facing gradual collapse until its final closure in 2012. And as you can see from the words and from the picture, this caused a great break for the residents of Dimona. For some of them, the factory wasn't only a working place, it was more like a second home. For others, actually, it was more like a symbol for discrimination and despair. But certainly, for all it was a symbol, we must not forget. Today, 10 years after, fortunately, this factory is going under an adaptive reuse process. The current plans are intending to adapt this unused original textile factory into a multifunctional center consisting from commerce, employment, public and residential, by the design of the Dani Lazar architects firm. Just imagine what potential and what impact could this kind of project have on its surroundings. And regarding to the final value I was talking about, the economic value, in that case, we should just wait and see and hope to get the desirable results. To conclude, Kitan Dimona is only the tip of the iceberg. There are many, many other more factories that are still awaiting a solution. For some of them, as Sivei Dimona or Argaman, it is already too late since they were demolished and destroyed. But for others, like the Pharma Sharp, the medicine factory in Bet Shean, the Slilim Chula in Kiryat Shmona, or the Sugat in Kiryat Gat, and maybe for many, many other more that are still waiting to be revealed, there is still a chance, since they're waiting, abandoned, for a solution. Unfortunately, all of these buildings, although they were built as part of a national policy, currently doesn't have any kind of holistic approach that is being offered for the recovery. I believe it is our opportunity and our responsibility to look after these buildings and bring them back into life. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Doron. Thank you for the talk. It was fascinating. One difference that came to my mind between the first examples that you gave for sites that really were successful for industrial heritage at the beginning of your talk, and your work on the Kitan factory in Dimona, is that the earlier sites, the first sites that you gave, were really were situated in large cities, in metropolises like Paris, London, Berlin. And my question is, how do you think it will affect the success of the Kitan factory in terms of its economic or prospective economic value, and will it affect, or how it will be?
Okay, so thanks a lot. It's a great question. And I think if to conclude the topic of what you're saying is, you're talking about context. And context, of course, urban context is a very important thing when we're thinking about the potential success of an architectural project. And of course, this is one of the challenges, definitely. But I could see here a couple of points of potential specifically in these places of the development towns. First, you must remember these are quite compact places, which means it could affect more easily, I think, on its surroundings, because in that case of Dimona, for instance, you can go by walking 10 minutes from the city center to the factory, even though it's on the surrounding of the city, which make it more connected. Another phenomenon in urban renewal, and it's also seems to be here, is the what called frog leap, which means during time cities and also the development towns are getting bigger. And that's how, although these factories were built as part of the zoning approach at the vicinity to the city, now when there is new buildings, they are going to be planned also from the other side. And that's how it's going to kind of swallow the factory and be much more central. I think there are, of course, another aspects like the economic aspect, which in much bigger and main cities like Berlin, New York, or London, it's much more easier maybe to do the effect, but I think that because these development towns are lacking so many programs, to pick the right new functions for it could do much even bigger effect. Think about it that in these places many times you can find programs like functions like a cinema or a library, and I think this is part of the strength. You have much more potential, but much more also problems to achieve it, that's true. But I guess time will tell if it will do the work. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for the talk. My name is Israel Gavai from the Technion, and I just wonder, for the people that lives there, why do you care about, or why do I care about a new building that will be a cinema or a factory or an high-tech company, instead of something that was built before and now I made it to be something else?
Okay, thank you. First, I think it depends. I'm quite sure not for everyone, not every resident of Dimona will have the same passion I have for this building, for sure. But I believe in conservation, especially of this kind of building, that sometimes you can't recognize from first sight its architectural value. The social story about them is not less important. And it's much about the identity of the place, that whether you choose to demolish it and that you're deleting the history. And it means something also about the perception of the people on their place, because you can delete it and make a new molder, and maybe it will serve them, they will think that it will serve them as good as other places. But I think it's something more principle, that you say this place have an history and we would like to conserve it in some way, and it's part of the identity of the place, and we can take it as a strength of the place, and not only as something that is functional. It's more about the symbolism of the place, and I think maybe the answer is.
Hi, I'm Shachar. I'm from Tel Aviv University. It's very much related to the first question. You talked about adaptive reuse as like a global universal strategy applied in many places. And is there like, and the examples you showed, I was aware of London and New York and so on. Is there like a very inherent difference in how this strategy is applied to industrial towns, industrial cities, compared to like large metropolises that are a center of culture as well? Like, is there, when the town is built around a factory or mines or something like that, or a port, is it applied differently inherently?
It's a great question. Unfortunately, I couldn't give you an answer because there is much more I need to learn about it, but that's true. There is a a whole field of study about it's called the company towns, or the post-industrial cities, like Detroit, for instance, is one of the most famous examples. And I should go more deeply on this field to realize the differences and how to do it right. Thanks.
Thank you very much.